Hey guys, I'm making this video real quick for two reasons. Number one, I am seeing a problem with my mic now. I can see, listening back on all this, putting it all together, that there is it seems like it's kind of circulating and it loses the sound a little bit, which is probably why my mic does cut out in StreamYard a lot. In the process of fixing that. Secondly, the Proud Boys case that I wanted to bring up on April 29th. We got distracted with the Crowder situation and all that, but I just wanted to bring this up. I do have permission from Freely Ashley to go ahead and make this video and place it here. And I also have permission from our friend Robert Govea. He was on here while we were talking about the Trump indictment, walking through all that to give you an idea of what's actually happening, the validity of the charges, and why it came across.
From Voice of the People. He says, definitely here for this one. I sent you an email for a bit of clarification on the Proud Boys trial. I want to bring it up tomorrow on your show called Off Label Podcast. Voice of the People, I think I saw the first part of that email. You're free to use whatever clips you need from this show. The other questions, I think, are more substantive questions, and I don't remember what they are. But have a tremendous show tomorrow, and check out my friend's Off Label Podcast, which will be streaming on YouTube.
So I will be using a lot of his footage in this to kind of drive the point home, because he's done a great job covering this over 60 plus days. They are now in deliberation. Closing arguments have been made, but there is a little bit of concern that came up with the closing arguments that I do want to show you guys. Check this out. And just so you guys know that the claim of 50 plus Fed informants were involved in January 6th is actually true, he's covered that as well. Take a look at this clip.
This is Pezzola's motion for a mistrial and a new trial for multiple Brady violations. Now, they say that the defendants, the Proud Boys, are now aware of at least some 50 undercover informants among protesters on January 6th. But the government is withholding information regarding this exculpatory evidence. The government has the evidence. They know who they are. They know what they were doing. They know who they were working with. The defense says, wait a minute, you're blaming us and our clients for being a part of a massive conspiracy. It sounds like they were a subset of a bigger conspiracy. The federal government had tabs on everything that was going on. And so we may have questions about some of the evidence that the defense sent to these CHSs, because it might prove to exonerate them. But if we don't know who those sources are, then we can't demand and go investigate those texts or those messages in the Telegram groups to exonerate our clients.
Now, I do want to bring this up here because the defense for Dominic Pezzola and the Proud Boys have asked the judge in jury instructions to be able to use this information, that there was 50 plus Fed informants involved in January 6th that were instigating, that were pushing this, to be able to use that to say all of the blame for this does not fall at the feet of the Proud Boys, since the government did have actors in there that were playing a role in this and they were instigating, that some of this blame does lie at the hands of the federal government. Take a look at this.
And these were the motions for mistrials and motions for curative instructions. And I want to give a hat tip over to Julie Kelly on this one. She had a great tweet about it. She says, very interesting motion came in, was denied, of course, by Judge Kelly in the Proud Boys case. That's now with the jury. Pezzola snarked about Ray Epps when he testified, but a prosecutor during closing arguments told jury that accusations that Epps was a Fed was a fantasy, right? A fantasy. Like, there's no evidence about this at all. And that's a very dishonest thing. There's plenty of evidence. We've talked about it here. There's a whole litany of reasons why Ray Epps is a questionable figure in this whole ordeal.
And there is evidence in this, including Ray Epps' own deposition that took place on Friday, January 1st, 2022, where in this, Adam Kinzinger and the rest of the redacted people that were involved in this, you could tell by reading this that they were leading Ray Epps into saying what they wanted him to say. But they took a little spin with it on this. At the very end of page 60, so it looks like around 9 a.m. your nephew texts you and Jim be safe. And then at 2:12 p.m. on January 6th, you text back, I was in the front with a few others. I also orchestrated it. This is the exact same time of the video that I had just played. Help us understand this text. What do you mean by orchestrate? What did you orchestrate? This is where it gets a little twisted after a break. I just meant that you have to understand our relationship, uncle-nephew. We hunt together. We We fund together. We fund with each other. We do that kind of stuff. What I meant by orchestrate, I helped people get there. That's not how you orchestrate that. But anyway, at that point, I didn't know that they were breaking into the Capitol. Windows had been broken. I didn't know anybody was in the Capitol. If I answered him, that means I was at 2:12, I was on my way back to the hotel room. And of course, there's a litany of videos out there, especially the one that's now infamous of him saying on the January 5th that we need to go into the Capitol and everybody screaming, Fed, 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 Fed. That video where he was whispering into a dude's ear about something that it's hard to make out, but yet a couple seconds later, the dude starts breaking down the barricade himself. So there is a huge litany of evidence that this dude actually is a Fed informant. That plus the fact he was on the most wanted list, the FBI's most wanted list, and they talked to him, and then all of a sudden he's taken off pretty much the next day. Very questionable, because very rarely, if any, does that ever happen.
And to be so dismissive of it is nonsense. You can say, well, he's a former member of the Oath Keepers. They got prosecuted. He is somebody who was there the night before screaming, going into the Capitol. Many others are being charged with conspiracy for doing a lot less than that. We had a situation where he actually went into the Capitol building and told that to the January 6th Select so-called committee. And the FBI had him on their most wanted list of violent people after the insurrection. The tweet is still posted up on their field office.
Told you. All of that is actually true.
So with all of these different things, it's not a fantasy at all. That's a mischaracterization of this. One of Pezzola's attorneys disagreed with this and submitted a motion. Let's take a look at it. This came on behalf of Dominic Pezzola. They say, comes now Dominic Pezzola asking for a curative instruction to fix something that happened. This is regarding the role of unidentified persons, possible informants, and confidential human sources. The proposed instruction is necessitated by assertions, claims, and arguments made by the government during their closing arguments.
So in other words, we want to address the 50 plus informants here and their role in this whole trial and the incident in question.
He writes, this is Roger Roots for Dominic Pezzola. He says, for example, the prosecutors, the government, stated during their closing arguments a few days ago that Pezzola's testimonial speculation that Ray Epps may have acted on behalf of the government was a fantasy. Pezzola took the stand and he said something about Ray Epps. The government rebutted that in their closing arguments. This is addressing that. Now, such an argument is not based on the evidence in this case. Mr. Epps has dodged a subpoena in this case.
And that is true. Because of Ray Epps' involvement with the Proud Boys case, they subpoenaed Ray Epps to be involved in this, and the government denied that request. The courts and the government denied that request. Why are they protecting Ray Epps?
And we've covered that. The defense asked for a subpoena that could be served by publication, meaning they could post this somewhere. The judge looked at the rules and said, you really can't do that in a criminal case like this. And he's right. But the point is, the rules don't afford it, but doesn't mean Ray Epps was being a cooperative witness in this case. If he was somebody who really wanted to clear his name, as he apparently wants to do because he shows up on 60 Minutes, a good question would be, why doesn't he respond to a lawful subpoena that was signed off on by a judge? They can't serve him. The judge issued a subpoena, but they can't serve him with it because he is nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found, but the dude wound up on 60 Minutes, which was orchestrated and agreed upon beforehand. So if 60 Minutes can find him, why can't the government?
So they wanted to try to serve him by publication. The judge said, no, I don't have the authority to do that. And I think the judge is right on that. But that doesn't exonerate Ray Epps. Moreover, the government has never categorically denied Epps was a source for all agencies. All agencies. Footnote 1. Now, he writes, in a recent interview in an episode of 60 Minutes, which was ridiculous, which we never got to dismantle and destroy, which we very likely will soon, because of the Tucker situation. But Mr. Epps emerged from hiding for a Puff Piece softball interview, they say. The 60 Minutes interviewer asked a suspiciously specific question, as they do. along the lines of, did anyone in the government tell you to go to the Peace Monument? Epps said no. Then at the end of the segment, 60 Minutes reported that the FBI stated that Epps was not an employee or a source for that agency. See how careful that language is?
Okay, so he's not a confidential human source for the FBI. The FBI specifically. Well, could he be a confidential human source for the transportation department that the government put him there to instigate with? Huh? They said that agency and that agency alone. What else is he involved in? And of course, don't take it as I'm trying to put him in the transportation department. I'm just using that as a innocuous source that doesn't have any real relevance to it, but you get what I'm saying.
Okay, but how about the rest of the government? Is he a source for Department of Homeland Security? Well, look, this is a total conspiracy. There is no evidence at all that Ray Epps is an informant, and nobody's ever confirmed it. And this I can tell you unequivocally, he is definitely not an informant for the FBI, okay? That's not what we asked you, weirdos. We want to know the whole of government. Does he work for you in any other capacity as a source? They don't want to answer that question. And these people at 60 Minutes, which, as we know, the media is basically writing scripted questions and handing them back and forth between this administration now. So the 60 Minutes conversation should have asked another question. Okay, not the FBI. What about DHS? You working for them? You working for any other agency? There's like 34 of them there in DC. Can you pick one? Can you affirmatively tell me that there is no relationship with any other federal agency whatsoever, period? Unequivocally, everybody.
And that's how they pulled this off. This is the tactic that they use, because if you're wrong about one thing, you've got to be wrong about everything else, right? Okay, so he wasn't a confidential source for the FBI. What about anything else? Oh, no, we're not going to talk about that because you were wrong on that. So everything else you got is a moot point.
Go, so you can say it at the same time. Ready? Go. No, they won't do it because they know it's not true. So Mr. Pizzola and his attorney say the government has refused to say whether Epps had a reporting relationship with HSI, which, as we know, which came out in this trial, is known to have handled CHSs on January 6th. And the court has denied efforts by the defense to inquire about these questions. It's not relevant. It's a whole separate agency. What do they have to do with anything here?
You see what I'm talking about?
They say they're not even case agents here. The FBI did the investigation. The FBI is prosecuting this. Confidential human sources are irrelevant. The defense argues that the evidence reveals several other suspicious actors who played destructive or instigator roles, but who are not identified. A significant example is the man in the red who first broke the window, which Dominic Pizzola is accused of breaking. That individual is known to have been present at nearly every breach and was even next to Ashley Babbitt at the time of Babbitt's murder. Yet the government has not identified or charged that person.
Now, the dude in red is all over the place. He has been identified in different places, but his actual identity has not been revealed. The fact that Ashley Babbitt is a big source of contention and he was there, he was an eyewitness to all of that. Why has he not been brought in to testify in any of it?
The man in the red. Who is that person? Footnote 2, the man in the red who first broke the window would likely have been the second person into the house corridor if Ashley Babbitt had breached the corridor. No charges for him. No identifications for him. Curious. Now, the government's closing argument therefore misleads the jury, writes the defense. Pizzola asks for a curative instruction to correct this along the following lines. They want the judge to tell the jury to say, hey, jurors, during the trial, you've been informed that undercover confidential CHSs of the government may have been involved in events. Now, there has been speculation and testimony or evidence that individuals other than the defendants may have played roles in the formulation and execution of the crimes in this case. You should disregard any assertions regarding whether a person is or is not a CHS unless those assertions are based on evidence, and you may draw an inference that the identity of unidentified or missing significant participants in criminal events or circumstances where the government likely knows the participants' identities. If you knew them, they would be unfavorable to the government.
So they're arguing here that because these informants were there, they need to be held accountable. You can't lie all of the blame at the Proud Boys' feet in this, and you must tell the jury to take that into account. So with all this information, how did the court respond?
Because as we talk about, think of it like a pie chart. If there's 1,000 people who are charged with crimes for an insurrection, who's really responsible for the insurrection? In this case, we want to know who was responsible for the initial breaches, most of the damage, right? The biggest cause of the interference with our democracy, as they say. We want to know that. Who is it? So if we can apportion liability and say you're 50% responsible and you're 50% responsible, then great, we can charge people with crimes and apportion it appropriately. But when you break it out by 1,000 people, or when you say the Proud Boys did it, but then we say, what? There's also 50 other CHSs that have been rumored to have been a part of this. And there's also the man in the red who is at every other breach as well. So maybe they should be apportioned some percentage of this blame and not the Proud Boys. And if the government's not going to tell you about these other people, then you can take that sliver of blame and give it to the government. Give it back to them. Don't give it to our clients. Respectfully submitted, Roger Root, Certificate of Service, signed April 25th, 2023. Now, as Julie Kelly told us, the judge very likely took a look at this and he said, get out of here. What are you, nuts? Denied. Next.
That's right. It was denied. Because the government is prosecuting this case. This is a federal court, but because we have evidence that the federal government was involved in this and the blame should be put on them as well, nope, we can't do that. The jury cannot use that there were federal informants involved in January 6th, specifically the Proud Boys case as well. Since we know that they exist, they have not been identified, and we are not giving up that information. You cannot use that as a way to influence your decision on Dominic Pezzola's appeal or any of the Proud Boys at all. What?
That is your chance to be ruthless.